Oh hey, hello. My name's Jody and I make bookish content on YouTube. These are the books I read this month, but I'm only going to talk about these because the rest of them I started and I probably won't finish and have the chance to talk about them by the time I post this video. So, with that being said, I know it seems like I read a lot of books this month, but I really didn't. I'm still a very much slow reader. It's just that some of these books were under 150 pages and there's a summer reading challenge going on where I could get $5. So I ended up just reading more than I usually do. I'm glad I did the challenge because I ended up reading a lot of books that I otherwise would have not picked up. So with that being said, I'll jump into it. The first book I read this month was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mutar and Max Gladstone. I picked this one up because I saw this in a couple places on YouTube / BookTube, Bookstagram, and also mayhaps because I saw it was 200 pages at the bookstore, so quite short and sweet. I also thought it would be a good segue after a month of reading just romance novels because I saw this was a fantasy / sci-fi love story. And actually it was pretty intense after coming from a month of reading silly rom-coms. It was definitely more complex in terms of a romance and story. So This Is How You Lose the Time War is about two rival time agents, Red and Blue, who travel back and forth in time, altering history on behalf of their warring empires. And the format of the book is written as a series of letters, switching from short narration and the correspondence between both Red and Blue. First off, the writing style of this book was absolutely beautiful. It was poetic, lyrical, and very sentimental. But if I'm being honest, I really struggled to get through the first 100 pages of this book. The style of writing, switching perspectives between Red and Blue was just really confusing for me to navigate. I was just constantly trying to understand who is talking in the beginning part of the books and like who is who. For a bit I was like, am I too small brained for this book? It was like I was trying to do math equations in my head, trying to pinpoint where I was in time and perspective and characters. But after the first 100 pages, I will say I did get the hang of the narration and the story and the characters, but that is just a warning that the first part of the book is very complicated and it's a lot in the beginning. I feel like the reading experience of this book is kind of difficult to describe. I feel like this is one of those books you need to pick up and read for yourself and just experience the chaos and see whether or not you like the story and the way it's written. Personally, I don't know how to feel about it. I feel like I will definitely appreciate this book more on my second read of it. So I do plan to read this a second time just because the first time felt a little mentally taxing. So I'm excited to reread this and kind of experience it in a more knowledgeable way since I now understand the two characters and kind of the shifting of the narration style. While it was really complex and demanded my thinking power, I really enjoyed the creativity and imagination of this book. I think it was very well written and devised. I do think the length of 200 pages is perfect for this book, or else I might have not gone through it. The second book I read this month was Piglet, a novel by Lottie Hazel. Oops. And this is a pretty new book. It was published in April of this year, so new book, didn't realize it. And I picked this up during my local bookstore crawl that I did this past May, but I did know of this book before I picked it up. It was on my Goodreads want to read list, and I don't know how it got there, but I recognized the cover because how can you miss this glorious artwork of a hamburger on a book cover? You know what I mean? So the book follows a woman nicknamed Piglet who has an exterior of the perfect life. She is an up-and-coming cookbook editor in London, and she lives in a nice house in Oxford, and she's about to be married to her handsome upper-class fiance Kit. However, 2 or 3 weeks before they're about to get married, Kit confesses to a horrible betrayal, which I will leave vague, just like the book leaves vague. So then the story navigates the breakdown of Piglet's carefully constructed facade and the perfect life that she tried to build and the person that she pretended to be. What this book does really well is its food imagery and descriptions. If you want like anime, Ghibli, food reels playing through your head, read this book, because this book is absolutely rich with food writing, which makes sense because the author actually has a PhD in food writing, which didn't know was a thing until I read her bio, but it's a thing and very intentionally written with food in mind. So don't read this while you're hungry. But this book is also great in its exploration of class, identity, food culture, and the pressure to conform to societal expectations and appearances through food. It also explores people's relationship with food and diving deeper into women's relationship with food. It explores how we use it for celebration, for bringing people together, throwing parties, but also how we can use food in not so healthy ways and often as a means of comfort by overindulging in it, and also the guilt we feel with it. Very insightful themes are explored via food, which I really liked in this book. And I think there's enough storyline and plot to really keep you interested throughout the book, but there was one thing that was lacking for me, which was my just emotional connection to Piglet. I think I just wanted to feel more sympathetic and more understanding of her situation, but I don't know, I struggled to really find a connection to the main character. I would have liked to feel some empathy as someone who has struggled with her view of food in the past, but that was just an element that I found missing, which I feel like would have made the book stronger if you were able to understand where she was coming from and what she was going through, how she handled the events that were unfolding around her. Overall, I really like this book. I like the themes it explored, I liked the overall story, and I really liked the food writing, but I don't think this is a book that I would reread or that I will particularly think about in the long term. So yeah. The next couple books I read for my local bookstore's summer reading challenge that they held. And the challenge for this one was a new to you classic. I think that's what the challenge was. So I read Animal Farm by George Orwell. I know Animal Farm is a popular high school curriculum required reading book, but my high school actually decided to read 1984 by George Orwell instead, so I never got to read Animal Farm until now, and I really enjoyed 1984 in high school, and I ended up really enjoying Animal Farm as well. And this is a pretty short book, I would say. This is only 128 pages, so really short and sweet. Because most people have probably already read this book in their life, I won't spend too much time talking about it. So Animal Farm is a satirical, allegorical novella that tells a story of a group of anthropomorphic farm animals who throw a farmyard rebellion against their human farmer slash owner. I believe Orwell wrote this novella with the intention of reflecting and telling the events leading up to the Russian Revolution. A lot of this is a commentary on the Russian Revolution that took place in like the 1900s. So it ends up being that Animal Farm is not a tale of rebellious farm animals, but it's really Orwell's sharp allegory of the Russian Revolution and basically the corrupting influence of power. If you haven't read this already, I definitely recommend it. I can see why it's a timeless classic. It's a thought-provoking commentary on the examination of power and corruption and control. Really creative story using animals to reflect upon an actual event that happened in history. I really enjoyed it. It was pretty fun to read. It's also under 150 pages, so definitely try to read this book if you can. The fourth book I read this month was Margaret Atwood's Cut and Thirst. And the reading challenge I was trying to target with this book was reading a book published in May of this year. I don't really think you can consider this a book. It's definitely more of a short story because it sits at around 35 pages and it was only $1.99 on Kindle. So I read this on my Kindle. I think it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited. But anyways, I picked this up because I read Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake and The Handmaid's Tale, so I wanted to reread her writing, and also I saw it was super short, so that may have influenced my decisions to read it. So this is a short story about three elder women who are scheming to avenge an old friend who was undermined in her writing career and confidence and health by a group of male poets decades ago. It's a very humorous short story about aging and friendship and loyalty and also revenge. It's not particularly a deep story, but the length was perfect for what it was. It was very witty and silly, and I thought it was a great short story. So if you're looking for something to just knock out quickly, and if you have Kindle Unlimited and it's free, I definitely think it's worth checking out. It's just a very nice, I think, palate cleanser and short read. The next reading challenge was to read a book recommended by a Bard's Alley bookseller. So the book recommended to me by the bookstore staff was White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link. And this is a collection of 7 short stories, specifically 7 fairy tale retellings. And they are retold and set in the contemporary and futuristic world. I didn't recognize any of the original fairy tales except for Hansel and Gretel, so I don't know how close the retellings were to the original, but judging from the Hansel and Gretel story, which I think was called The Game of Smash and Recovery, it was very loose retelling of Hansel and Gretel. So I assume that's the case for the rest of the fairy tale retellings. I would say don't expect a one-to-one reenactment of the fairy tales in this book. Overall, this was a really bizarre book. Probably one of the weirdest books I read this year. At the end of most of the stories, I was like, what the heck did I just read? It was just very eerie and uncomfortable and dark and twisty and somewhat disturbing, but strangely very addictive and compelling. I was drawn to the stories. They were pretty fun stories to read. I would say the short stories towards the end of the book I liked more than the ones in the beginning. If you're a fan of speculative fiction and magical realism and unsettling stories, I would definitely recommend this book, but if not, then maybe skip this one. The next book was also a recommendation from a Bard's Alley bookseller / bookstore staff, but it was a recommendation from another seller, not the one that recommended me White Cat, Black Dog. This staff member recommended me The God and the Gumiho. And the reason why she recommended me this one is because she overheard me saying that I like fiction and fantasy and romance. And so this is specifically focused on the genres of fantasy and romance. I checked this off in my reading challenge as a book published in June, since I already did the book staff recommendation one. This is the 6th book that I read this month. If you want a book that reads exactly like a K-drama, this is the book to read. The story follows a nine-tailed fox, a legendary and notorious nine-tailed fox named Kim Hani, and she partners with a fallen trickster god named Sokja to track down a demon that escaped from the underworld and threatens to end humanity. This is also very loosely based off some Korean folklore, but I was unfamiliar with the Korean folklore mentioned. First off, I will say this book was extremely cheesy and somewhat cringy at parts. Some of the lines had me like, interesting. The main characters are supposedly more than 1,000 years old, but their dialogue came off as almost teenagery. They're very quirky characters. Overall, I was very entertained by this book. I thought it was a very fun read. I do think I'm slightly biased because of my Korean heritage, and I just really liked the Korean elements in this book. While I wasn't too keen on the romance, I did really like the mystery slash detective slash action-y parts of this book and story. I do think this book is for a certain type of audience. I think you would enjoy this if you like K-dramas and rom-coms and the grumpy sunshine trope actually, but other than that, this may or may not be up your alley. The last and final book I read this month was Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was not a part of any reading challenge, by the way. I just picked this up because I wanted to read it. Also, did you know there is a movie being made for this book right now? Being directed by Taika Waititi and starring Jenna Ortega and Amy Adams? Yeah, well, now you know. By the way, I did not pick up this book with that knowledge. It's something I learned after I finished the book and Googled the book. I've been wanting to read this book for a while. I did read Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, and I think Sammy has Ishiguro's Remains of Day. I picked this one up because I thought the story was very relevant to our time, having to do with AI and robots, and also because I thought the cover was really pretty. So Klara and the Sun is a dystopian science fiction story. It takes place in a dystopian society where children can get genetically engineered for enhanced academic ability, and they call this in the book as being lifted. Since school is provided online by tutors and there's limited socialization that these children get, parents will oftentimes get their kids a artificial friend, or AF, as companions. This story is told from the perspective of an artificial friend slash AF named Klara. I thought the book opened more doors than it closed. I think that this book had so many fascinating things and concepts that it could have explored, but it was just overall felt very unfinished. Just all the loose ends just stayed loose ends. I was invested. I kept reading to find out more and to find some development or resolution. I don't have any complaints about the prose or the writing. I thought it reflected really well of the perspective of the character is told from, but I feel like I came away reading this without a lot of emotional impact. But yeah, I just feel like this book just fell flat for me. Was slightly disappointed with this book. If you are to pick up a book by Kazuo Ishiguro, I definitely recommend Never Let Me Go. I thought this one was okay. So that wraps up my August monthly recap of all the books I read this month. I read some pretty unique books and probably ones that I would not have picked up if I hadn't done the reading challenge. So kudos for my bookstore for holding that reading challenge, and pretty successful reading month, even though some of those books were quite short, but reading books nonetheless. So let me know if you liked this video, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in September. And I'm excited for fall. I'm excited for cozy books and candles and blankets and just colder weather. So see you in the fall. Bye!